All right, everyone. I know, first I want to apologize to everyone on the live stream. I know we are having kind of suboptimal audio quality and video quality. Actually, you can't even see me right now. Okay, hi. We are working on that. We've got a patch that hopefully will be working in the very near future, so apologies for that. So my job right now is to talk about the summer institutes and kind of why we started them and how they work. So first I'll talk about some challenges, and then I'll talk about some solutions, and then I'll talk about some logistics. So years ago when Matt and I started out in this field, there was really, it was kind of cultish. There was interest, but it was a really small focused group. But now we've got kind of big problems in the world that are pulling us into some of the most important issues of our day. So I could have chosen many different cases, but this one, for many of us in the field, hit home because it touched on so many of the kind of core issues we've grappled with as a field. But I could have chosen debates about machine learning in healthcare, or machine learning and incarceration, or any of the other many important ways in which computational social science is actually spreading out into the world. So those are good things for us who want to see the field grow. But as Matt was alluding to, and as the previous discussion just kind of was centering around, the field is growing really, really fast. So one of the neat things I had an opportunity to do before this year is to take a look at to do a kind of citation analysis, to try to actually understand where the field is growing most, and where it's well integrated, and where it isn't well integrated. And this is, like all citation analyses, this is very imperfect. This was joint work with Achim Edelman, Tom Wolfe, and Daniel Montaigne, where we pulled data from the Web of Science, which many of you will know is a large repository of academic work. Covers a lot of journals, but definitely not all the journals, and probably underestimates some work in computer science and conference proceedings. So you're kind of seeing more of the social side of computational social science. But if we look at these data over time, here, if you'd like to follow along with the slides yourself, the link is on our schedule page. I'll show you how to access that in just a second. And there's a link to a blog post here that describes a little bit more about precisely how the data were generated. But you can see that in the last 10 years here, we've seen just an absolute explosion of research in the area. And here we're capturing it by mentions of computational social science, or articles that were categorized as social data, which mention terms like big data. Remember big data? And now we also hand-coded and added in a few other articles that are described in this blog post. So we're growing really fast, and that makes it difficult to answer this question of what is computational social science. But if we plot the citation network, we see that our field is really, really highly interdisciplinary. And so that does have an important bearing on this question of will we see departments of computational social science. We already have a few in Europe primarily, but if we look at how the field is integrated, it's going to be particularly hard to see this on the live stream, and it's hard for you here too. But you can pull it up on your screens at the link here, and what you see is we're actually a pretty well integrated field. The primary conversations are occurring between information science, business and economics, and then psychology and sociology, and of course computer science is kind of sprinkled in throughout the citation network. We do have kind of isolated pockets, primarily of the social sciences, psychology and sociology, and political science, unfortunately, isn't categorized in the Web of Science system, so we weren't able to track that. So apologies to the political scientists. You are in here, and in fact, the most cited article in our database is the David Lazar et al. Piece entitled Computational Social Science, which appeared in the journal Science, and that's really a nice introduction to the field if you're looking for a piece to learn with. Okay, so we have 3 challenges so far. We have big problems in the world. The field is growing rapidly. The field is interdisciplinary, and that means that conversations are spreading all over the place more rapidly than any of us can keep track of. We have a 4th challenge, which is that training opportunities are rare. So we have a remarkable diversity of talent in this room and all around the world. Some people taking part in the program today are full stack programmers, meaning they know multiple open source software languages, and they've been, say, building web pages for a really long time. Other people are just learning to use R or Python for the very first time. It's particularly hard as we have to have conversations both across kind of the immense technological gulfs, learning all the domain knowledge that one needs to kind of enter the field, but also on the social science side, many of the data scientists here in this room today and out there at our other sites are interested in learning social science theory. So we need a unique program that doesn't just teach people to code, it also needs to teach people social science. And so that's another big challenge and one that we're trying to solve here today. So the solution so far, we think, is to scale this as quickly as possible, as far as possible, and as fast as possible. And so this is our second year of streaming around the world. Last year we had 9 sites, and this year we have 11 sites. And I'll say a little bit more about that in just a minute. But first, let me kind of articulate some goals for all of us in every site. The first is to provide state-of-the-art training in both in both computational methods and also social science theory. And so we'll have a series of lectures for the next 5 days on digital trace data, text analysis, field experiments, mass collaboration, and surveys in the digital age. And we will spend most of our mornings talking about those things, but we really quickly want to put the data in your hands and have you learn from each other. And that also goes, by the way, that also goes for the entire community of SICSS. So if, last year, for example, we discovered some really rich conversations are happening on the Slack channel. We had people at the Duke site sharing code with people at the Cape Town site and vice versa. So we'd really like to see the training transcend Matt and I's lectures. And of course, there's the TAs here at Princeton and TAs at all of our partner sites who are also available to help you. The second thing is that we really want to challenge disciplinary divides. Everyone here and at most of the sites comes from a very, very diverse background, and that's very much by design. So we want to try to reinforce the conversations that are going on in the middle of this network, and also maybe build bridges to some of these more remote communities, and really try to let everyone leave here learning something new about a different discipline. And as we look at the success stories of SICSS so far, many of our biggest success stories have involved interdisciplinary collaboration. So one of our first papers just came out in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It was a sociologist and a political scientist who jointly studied the wisdom of crowds and political polarization. And we like to think that's the kind of collaboration that might have never happened without this institute. So we really want to see people challenge disciplinary divides as much as possible. The other reason we want to see you do that is because science tells us that this makes for better science. So this is a piece by Brian Uzi and co-authors that appeared in Science. They actually track whether atypical combinations of disciplines produce higher impact science in terms of a variety of metrics, including citations and various other metrics. And what they see and what these plots here show is that indeed team science and highly interdisciplinary science has higher impact. Third, I mentioned this earlier, we want to reach a broad audience. So we've got sites all over the world, and this year this is from the past years, this is Cape Town last year, Helsinki last year, Seattle, Chicago, CUNY, and Duke. And I want to show you that there's people out there who you can connect with. And I want to show you some ways to do that in just a second. This year, though, we've got sites in Monterrey, Mexico, Bamberg, Germany, Istanbul, Turkey, LA, Chicago, Zurich, Cape Town, Research Triangle Park, which is near Duke in North Carolina, New York, and Oxford. So we've got literally hundreds of people following along today. And again, I hope that you will make connections at each of your institutes, but I also hope that after you leave here, you'll see someone wearing a SICSS t-shirt and start a conversation. That's one of our goals. Fourth, we're here to create an open source set of tools that both will be widely accessible to anyone at the institutes or anyone who's not in an institute following along. So I'm going to show you in a moment how to access all the materials. We also have open source teaching curriculum. And the idea there is that when you leave here, many of you will go on to teach classes in this area, and we wanted to hand off to you some materials for you to either work from or to edit yourselves and turn into something better. And in that spirit, if you find bugs in the code or if you find issues or things that could be coded better, please, please share them. If you're familiar with GitHub, if you could make pull requests, that would be ideal. But short of that, put it on the Slack channel or email one of the TAs. And hopefully everyone has now learned how to use Slack if you haven't used Slack before. Okay. So here's a link to our main website. And if this is the web version, but if you click on schedule and materials here, you'll see a list of all the daily lectures, and you'll see links to each section. So my slides today on the Y6 part of the schedule are linked here. There will also be annotated code and what's known as a markdown file that will let you easily not only cut and paste code into your own machine if you wish to do that, but also provides really detailed annotation or instructions about what the code is doing. And that's to try to relieve everyone of note-taking and to give you a resource to come back to after the institute. So please do check that out. If you are at one of the other institutes, you're going to want to come to the Princeton page and then go to the Teaching and Materials site, or perhaps your local organizer has their own site-specific resources. Many of the people at partner institutes will see lectures from people other than Matt and I. And so if you're following along at another site, please listen to your organizer to determine where to access the materials. And because we're doing this open source thing, we really want to teach the teachers. So our whole idea in starting this institute was to put ourselves out of business as soon as possible. We were hoping to do that in 2 years, and then the darn field had to grow so rapidly and so widely that we're now exploring ways of keeping the institutes going, and we have high hopes that that will happen. One of the things we're most proud of is that people who leave here pay it forward. And so here's a picture of all the many past participants who are leading institutes or participating in institutes in some other way through giving lectures. By my last count, there's a couple dozen alumni who are participating in some way, and we hope many of you, both here in Princeton and at other sites, will go on to teach the material or perhaps even lead a partner site. Finally, our SICSS goal is to create a diverse community. We had an earlier discussion about promoting access to materials, but we really embrace diversity in all forms, every single metric. And one of the really neat things about the community here, these are some of the roughly 941 people who have either participated in one of the past institutes or are participating this year. You can actually see everyone's picture and read their bio, all 941 of them, by going here. So if you're looking for someone that's interested in poverty research, maybe control find that page, and you can find literally everyone in this orbit who's at this program who's working on that issue. And we hope that this kind of community building will facilitate ties that survive far beyond this institute. And indeed, many of our alumni continue to arrange reunions and that type of stuff at their disciplinary conferences or at, say, the International Conference on Computational Social Science. And we're very proud of that as well. Okay, so now getting into logistics in about the 5 minutes left I have. Our schedule is kind of modular, meaning each institute is going to run a little differently. In this East Coast US time zone, the lectures are in the morning. They're either by Matt or I each morning, or if you're at another site, they might be led by one of your local site organizers who has particular expertise in that area. And each afternoon, we do a group exercise. So after our coffee break in a few minutes, Matt's going to lecture about ethics, as he mentioned earlier, and then there'll be 2 group exercises designed to not only give you more access to training, but also to begin to meet each other. And we like to put you in the driver's seat as soon as possible because one of our secondary goals is, of course, to break down disciplinary divides. And that's why the entire second week we spend incubating research on a kind of startup model. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. We'll also have lectures by guest speakers, as many of you know. This evening we'll have one here in Princeton by Alondra Nelson, who's a wonderful leader, former leader of the Social Science Research Council, and has been heavily involved in many of the most important initiatives in our field, including Social Science One, which is an initiative to launch broader access to data from Facebook and other industry partners. So we're all very much looking forward to hearing from her and several other speakers here this week. In a moment, I'll show you all the other speakers we're going to see from all the other sites, and the list is just spectacular. It includes Sandy Pentland from MIT and Udaya Pearl from UCLA and many, many, many other just wonderfully talented scholars. We may try to stream some of those here to Princeton, but hopefully as many of these talks will be archived as possible, and you'll be able to access them after the Institute. So I want to say a few words about the second week. Our goal in the second week is to encourage you and inspire you and even fund you to do some interdisciplinary team-based research. And so the way this works at Princeton and at some of the other sites is to do a process known as research speed dating. So basically what we do is we have you all crowdsource a list of your interests, and then we do a cluster analysis on that data. Of course, data-driven strategy, right? And then we sort you into groups that are maximally diverse and minimally diverse. And we have you come up in iterative fashion with research ideas. Then we put all those up onto a Google Sheet, and then you elect onto a team. And then during that second week, your goal is to launch a research project. That can mean many different things. For many groups, it would involve trying to develop a high-quality proposal by the end of the Institute. For other groups, it might be creating a new public good, some new type of tool, some contribution to the open source community. And some projects, and this is important, some projects will fail. We operate on a kind of startup model. And if your project does fail, we still want to hear about it. We want to know why it failed so other people can learn from the failure. That's another one of our principles, is to do postmortems of the entire institutes as well, so that everyone can learn about what's working. So on our last day here, we'll have presentations by as many groups as sort themselves out in the second week. As I mentioned earlier, here's the topic schedule for the next few days. Tomorrow I'll be lecturing on collecting digital trace data. We're going to talk about extracting data from APIs or application programming interfaces. We're going to talk about screen scraping. We're going to talk about building bots, and we're going to talk about building apps for social science research. On Wednesday, I'll be talking about automated text analysis. We'll cover the basics of text analysis. We'll also have a guest lecture by Brandon Stewart, who's going to talk about topic modeling and structural topic modeling. And then I'll be talking about text networks, a relatively new technique for automated text analysis. Then on Thursday, Matt's going to talk about surveys in the digital age. We're going to talk a lot about things like AmTurk or Amazon Mechanical Turk, and how to integrate that into survey research, and how to do kind of hybrid designs that take advantage of both the ready-made and custom-made data that Matt was talking about earlier. Friday, Matt's going to lecture on mass collaboration, which is fantastic. You know, he's probably the best person to talk about this issue and has led many of the field's most exciting initiatives. I think he's going to talk a bit about the Fragile Families study, Fragile Families Challenge, which was really one of the more exciting things, I think, that happened in the field in the last few years. And then finally, Matt's going to talk about field experiments. We're also going to get a guest lecture from Abdullah Almatuk, who's an alumni of the program. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, all the materials you're going to want to access are on this page, linked here. And here's an example of slides, but I just want to show you briefly as we get into tomorrow. This is the annotated code. And take a minute and check out what this looks like. You may want to review it a little bit before tomorrow just to get a sense of how you want to prepare and how you want to try to retain information. Again, our goal was to put it all down on paper for you, but people will vary as to how much they want to run the code as we're going along or take their own notes. Okay. Here's the wonderful list of visiting speakers, both at Princeton and at all of the other sites. We've got a Google Doc that describes when these other talks are happening at other sites. So this is so that people at each site or here at Princeton can come together and maybe watch in groups. Again, we're hoping to archive all of that on our YouTube channel, which is not visible here, but it's at the bottom of this slide. There's a link there, and that should be available as soon as possible after the conclusion of each talk. Matt mentioned some of this a little earlier. If you want to ask a question to a speaker and you're not here at Princeton, you can post your question to the Slack channel. We've already had a few people do that, so I think most people know what Slack is at this point. It's a chat platform that we use to share everything. You can also tweet your question to us. If we're lecturing, we obviously won't be able to answer it in real time, or you can email us, or you can tweet your question to one of our TAs. Okay. I want to end just by showing some of the group projects that we've had in the past. I mentioned earlier the paper that appeared in PNAS, but I also want to underscore that the contribution need not be a original piece of research. Abdullah Almatuk, who I mentioned earlier, who's going to lecture on experiments, spent much of his time in and around the Summer Institute developing Empirica, which is an open source platform for running experiments online that many of us have used and enjoy. So if something like that were to come out of this, so much the better. We want you to get whatever kind of project experience you want here, and we're very proud of how the project kind of emerged from the ground up and cross-disciplinary lines. And you can see a list of other successful group projects on our webpage, and by successful, I mean completed. We consider, again, even failures to be a success if they create a learning experience. Finally, if you are following along online and aren't at one of the institutes, we've also created this spreadsheet, this Google Sheet, which allows you to find partners who are also following along online with whom you could start a group project. So do check that out if you're following along online and would like to start a project with others. Okay, so a few quick words about how you can contribute to making our event a success. The first is to be open. In our experience, these first few days require a lot of, overcoming jargon and, understanding how to talk to each other. Openness is key there, obviously. This is a kind of a sine qua non of the success of SICSS. And hand in hand with openness comes patience. As I mentioned at the outset, we have every type of skill set here. So if you are one of the full stack programmers and watching someone lecture on APIs, which you've used for 10 years or something like that, try to learn how to teach. And so we're hoping that everyone can get some kind of experience out of stuff, even if it's stuff they already know. Our general experience is that no one knows everything. And so it's great to have a 1 week where we can really try to cover most everything. Inevitably, we won't cover every single thing, but hopefully we can try to cover as much as possible. And if there are items that we leave out, we here at Princeton and encourage people at other sites to organize informal conversations about subjects for which there's expertise in the room. So for example, if there were a group of people here really interested in agent-based modeling, which is not on our curriculum, you could have a series of dinner conversations or other kind of informal gatherings around a particular issue. And we can also have those type of gatherings around professionalization issues. So people ask questions about getting published, or if you wanted to talk about writing a book, or what the tenure process is like, whatever is on your mind. One of the real values and one of the real value added of SICSS is that we're able to have kind of informal conversations that can cover a lot of other issues. Togetherness, that one probably goes without saying, and generosity. So we hope that you'll pay it forward. We hope that you'll help us make our content better, and we hope that you'll share your content with everybody here, and ideally with everyone at every institute. And finally, we've got an anonymous feedback form. This one here is for all sites. So we're hoping to get general feedback about the event. I know that we're going to have a lot of negative comments about the live stream. We're working on that. It'll be better, hopefully, in 15 minutes. But really, any kind of constructive Criticism is very valued by Matt and I, and also other organizers. And lastly, most sites will have their own site-specific feedback form. So if there's some site-specific issue, you don't like the food, the room is too hot, or something like that, please use the site-specific form for that. Okay, so that's it, and now we have about 10 to 15 minutes for a coffee break.